Wavect, the Web3 software company that understands what you want.
Hi everyone, welcome at Wavect. Today with James Babarinde, who is Senior Product Designer at Microsoft and Augmented Reality Product Designer at Novastack. And today we're going to talk about how you can kickstart your project with a great user experience. Thank you, James, for being here. And starting out, I would love to hear from you a little bit more about what I just talked about, right? What are your passions? What are you doing? And maybe how does your everyday look like?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show. I I really enjoy a lot of the content, so happy to be contributing today. Um, yeah, with my experience, it's funny. I started out in entertainment. I was doing motion graphics and illustration, mainly because I was trained classically as an illustrator. Um, I got my BA from college called Sheridan. It's up here in Canada. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they're mainly known for animation. I was in the illustration program, so naturally I went on to contract as a motion designer and illustrator in the industry. And then over time, I as because of the companies that I worked for, uh, mainly because they were in tech, I started making this transition over to product. And I went from motion to graphic design to web design, and then eventually just landed in product and specializing now in um, user experience and design systems. Um, Currently, I'm working on the team's mobile app, um, specializing in things like information architecture, working closely with engineers to make sure our solutions are feasible. And yeah, it's been an awesome journey. Regards to the augmented reality, this is actually part of some of my contracting work, where um, when I was heavy into the 3D and motion space, I it was something that I've always been passionate about since watching sci-fi movies and playing video games and whatnot. Augmented reality just seemed like a natural thing for me to get into, and as I was getting into it, I ended up pitching and landing this contract with IBM, and uh, the project was for the Trade Innovation Show. So this was an annual show where they show things that are in development using the IBM cloud infrastructure, and I came in to develop the application for that particular show, helping people wayfind, explain what's happening in the event, and then also just to bring a level of novelty to it with augmented reality. And I ended up, like through that, I ended up incorporating a company, Novastack, because in order to do these types of contracts, there's a lot of logistics that go into it in order to even work with the company. Things like insurance come into play. So that was also just a natural progression of my passions, and I've continued to contract through that, and also specialize in my day jobs, just doing design systems and user experience related work in product. So yeah, it's been an enjoyable journey. I'm uh, looking forward to kind of chatting more and with you about it today. Hopefully the audience can get some valuable insights in the end.
No doubt about that, mate. um, I'm a noob regarding things you just said, right? I'm a regular developer. So when you say, for example, motion graphics, how would you explain it to someone who has no idea?
Yeah, sure thing. So easiest way to explain it is if you've ever seen, a trailer for something, right? If you go to the movie theater and before the movie starts, back in the old world when we all went to the movie theater, we're slowly getting back now, but before it starts, you see trailers, right? You might see a trailer for a product, for example. Um, Maybe Star Wars is coming out, and you're seeing all these toys associated with Star Wars. As we know, merchandise is a huge thing with Star Wars. It's one of the biggest revenue sources in that whole thing. So, um, same thing goes with other films, in mostly Disney and Marvel, right? Where you might see these plush toys or things like that. So a motion designer will put together clips from a movie and then also the toys or the merchandise and show it in some sort of interesting way. Uh, Maybe even add in graphics onto the toys themselves from the movie. And when I was at Cineplex, Cineplex is our main movie chain here in Canada. Um, so we would work with studios like Disney, like Warner Brothers to create these trailers before the movie starts. So it would serve two purposes: one, to promote the movie, and the other to promote the merchandise. So you're getting a 2-for-1 kind of deal, and the studio will send us assets. I think one of my most enjoyable ones was Black Panther when it came out because it was just a huge buzz, and then also Star Wars, working with some of the effects. Although um, the studios are pretty tight in terms of creative, what they want you to do and what you're allowed to do. So you also have to work within those tight boundaries. But yeah, in a nutshell, it's just creating a nice visual that has movement, tells some kind of story to make it meaningful to you in the end, where you might feel like you want to, watch the movie or get the merchandise.
Okay, super cool. Just learned something. Thanks. Yeah, I have quite a similar question maybe for the audience. How about UX itself, right? You talked about product design. We just talked about motion graphics. It feels like there are a lot of different things that plug into that, right? What do you consider one of the main aspects of the whole area?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big topic. It branches out to a lot of interaction touch points, I guess. So from the user seeing something, the user feeling something, the user accomplishing a task, or um, signing up for something, it can involve a lot of things. Essentially, it's just how satisfied a user is with your product or service. That's all user experience is about, the satisfaction level, and allowing them to do what you're offering in a very clear way. So um, there's lots of tenets that we would kind of go by. So making sure things are discernible, understandable with uh, any age, right? Any geo as well, taking into account the type of language being used. So it's universal. Um, Making sure that there's not a whole lot of cognitive overload in this process. So an example is if your product is about purchasing a hoodie, you want the user to arrive on your platform, understand what they need to do, what the intent is, which is purchasing the hoodie, being very clear with the options. Maybe you can change, uh, the type of color of that particular hoodie, the size, all of that relevant info that eventually leads to their satisfaction when they put on the hoodie. Um, and then making sure it's accessible. So if you're going on and maybe you have a vision impairment or you're uh, on that spectrum, still allowing you to, at least through the screen reader, to go through the start of the flow to the end of the flow and still have your hoodie in the end. So that's like an accessibility is a big part of it. And then you also take into account, you know, areas where maybe you're in the dark and you're on your phone. Maybe it's at night and you're just browsing the hoodie for like your trip that you're planning. Um, or like you're outside, it's really bright, making sure like you can still see the content on your phone. Um, and if you're on a mounted device, for example, and you can only see the phone in landscape or the tablet in landscape, making sure you can still go through that whole flow in a very clear, concise way. And then if you have to work with, you know, larger text, um, by default on your device, making sure that the content is not cropped, making sure you can still see your options. They're not off the page somewhere that you can't now browse to because your platform doesn't scale that way. If you're in another country, making sure, you know, the left to right, right to left, it's still coherent for you if that's where your audience is or uh, your market is. And yeah, just scaling for all these different scenarios and keeping you in um, a happy place from start to finish in the end. And we take into account even the checkout flow, right? When you start getting into um, you know, how easy is it for you to start the checkout flow to end in the checkout flow? Don't want to make that process painful to where now you're getting a drop from people that might have made their decision to get that hoodie, but now have dropped off because of a painful checkout experience. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these things bleed into, you know, blockchain and, as we're seeing, NFTs as well. And yeah, that's essentially the meat of it. Happy to maybe um, talk more in depth about certain areas that maybe aren't clear in how I described it, or where you think the audience might be interested.
Uh, First of all, thanks for the elaboration. Yeah, I think two things would be super interesting that both actually relate to NFTs, Web3 in general. The first, we have talked before about gaming UX or gaming itself, right? Um, how, because it sounded like it, how is the UX of a game different, especially related maybe to a Web3 game, right? A play to earn, whatever, to a regular app, mobile app UX or whatever you want to compare, for example.
Yeah, so Web3 gaming in general is really interesting. We've so one part of UX that I didn't mention is the research aspect. So how do we know people are satisfied? Well, we do a ton of research. We have whole research teams that will they'll find, you know, empirical data, um, telemetry, and certain aspects like how often you may have um, clicked through a funnel or a filter or something like that, and how often you've done that through your life cycle of that product, or a particular part of the life cycle where we maybe did an experiment. Um, Another is like, you know, heuristics that we know from other apps. If you are working um, in tech, for example, uh, and let's say you're in the messaging space, you would have been looking at research from things like Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, Discord, all these things, to see what people have collectively learned over time and applied to their products. If you look at products from like even 5 years ago, they're a lot different till today because of things we've tested and know that work. A lot of that ends up being also distilled down into the OS guidelines. And when I say OS guidelines, I mean like Apple has their own, you know, Apple HIG, it's called. They have their own guidelines for how to make a product on their platform, and so does Google Material. They have their own set of guidelines, and these are based on those heuristics. So through all of these, we can come up with at least a starting point of what works. And now when you launch the product, you continue testing within your specific area to understand your user base, how they're using the product, areas where they might be dropping off in engagement, areas where they're not following through certain tasks, um, and finding out what they really need to do and just making it easier and better for them. When it comes to Web3, there were a lot of pain points in the beginning, and there are still some ongoing now. And a lot of it has to do with your private wallet, right? Remembering the keys, things like that. This is a new paradigm of, how to um, basically conduct trading, right? Not just like on an exchange or something like that, but trading of goods with um, maybe like funds that you have that you give to the company and they give you a product in return. So we're still kind of learning, I would say. Um, One of the interesting areas that I've been doing is with this platform, Sparkle's NFT. Now, this is an NFT marketplace based on the um, Flare network. Um, and what I've been doing there is just applying what we know from the traditional product space into um, uh, into blockchain essentially, and a Web3 experience. So while in the traditional space we don't have uh, private keys and things like that that you need to remember, copy paste, write out, we do have credit cards, right? We do have other methods of payment. So bringing some of that learning into Web3, understanding, where people might drop off from the traditional space. So if there are too many steps in that checkout flow, um, then the user might drop off. If we're not offering their particular, um, bank, for example, if you don't accept payment from a particular bank, things like these you want to make apparent upfront as opposed to making them go through maybe 5 steps and then in the end finding out that they can't actually pay because their bank's not supported or um, PayPal is not supported if that's like their main method of payment. And when you relate that into Web3, you're thinking about the different uh, layers of chains. So like Ethereum is supported, things like that. And then also thinking about some of the chains that require you to have, like in addition to your private key, but also verifying um, other verifying numbers. So like with a traditional card, it might be the 3-digit number, right? In Web3, maybe it's another kind of code specific to that layer one blockchain that you might need to enable. So XRP is one that might have some. There are a few others, especially when you're talking about ledgers and such. If you're trying to attach something from a ledger, in order to send or receive a transaction, you need an additional code. So just trying to make all those things very apparent to someone so that they understand if what they need will be supported from the start, and then making it easy for them. When it comes to gaming specifically, I think what we've seen is that the gaming community aren't so huge on NFTs. Um, we've seen this with like Ubisoft when they tried to launch a project, and it wasn't met with the greatest enthusiasm by the traditional gaming community. And with Web3 gaming, people that are interested, it's like the total opposite. Like they're all the way into it. And then you have to kind of just balance that and try to understand like where can you still maybe have the benefits of blockchain, speed, um, verifying a unique ID, things like that, and bringing it into your game maybe, but not in a way that takes away from uh, what people don't like about NFTs. And um, where I'm coming in with one other project that I'm doing, a personal project under Novastack, um, is I'm trying to cater to the traditional gaming community, but using the best bits of blockchain to where you're not immediately thrown off by hearing, the word NFT or whatnot. Just really driving that utility first model that I think like most people are starting to see now, especially because I have one foot in like the traditional products areas and then one foot in blockchain. I see both sides and I hear both arguments pretty often of what we like and don't like about NFTs and blockchain, and it mainly just has to do with trust. It hasn't been around long enough yet to develop that level of trust, but through the right utility projects, um, they are successful and they do have happy communities. So um, those are the ones that we want to continue pushing and uh, emulating. And also in Sparkle's NFTs, those are the projects that we try to look for as well to bring on the platform, where they have a very strong connection with their community. Um, and at that point, you're not really asking about like what is the utility, because it's just the regular product, and they just happen to have NFTs or they just happen to have blockchain interaction. You're still getting all the benefits you would if it had nothing to do with NFTs or blockchain. And I think that's kind of the best way to go about thinking about your project, or if it's a product that you're making.
Yeah, 100%. I think, as you perfectly said, the gaming industry has the issue that those play-to-earn games have a different target group, right? They don't build the games to create good games, right? But more like an opportunity for people to earn something, right? And that attracts completely different target group. What I really liked is basically what I got from this now is don't make me think, right? Which is a popular saying. If I'm not sure about the statistics, you're the expert here, but if I think our user has to click more than 3 times, they don't know where they are on the page anymore, something like that. Not sure if that's correct, but
Yeah, it's a nice rule of thumb to have. Like generally, you want to keep things less than three clicks wherever you are on the site, and that's where you get into all these like information architecture. Like if I'm levels deep into one area of this product, how do I now go back and view something else? Do I have an easy access or an easy route to do that? So it's a nice rule of thumb to have. Um, Generally, simple is better, but simple doesn't always mean removing all the bolts and nuts. Um, it can just mean letting the user know where to go and what should happen when they go there. It's kind of like a car. If you take away all the bolts and nuts, now you've lost so much control that you might not have a great driving experience. But if we keep consistent where the radio is always going to be, your music things are always going to be, however complicated that radio gets, like satellite radio now we have, right? Over time, it's still always in the same place and you know where to go. Same with the air conditioning system. It's one thing to make it more sophisticated, right? Maybe you want to add some timing in there, right? Just more options. But as long as you keep it in the same area, we'll always know where to go for air conditioning. And same thing with like your speedometer, things like that. If you start changing your speedometer into a completely different place now, and you put your air conditioning where the speedometer usually is, now now everything's like jumbled up. Even if it's still, you know, even if you have less things in that car, if their air conditioning unit or the controls for it are now where the speedometer used to be, you're ignoring all the past heuristics that have come to make this thing simple, because we know where to go for what we're looking for. So yeah, it's a nice 3 clicks is a nice rule of thumb starting point, and then keeping in mind these other things as well.
I love it. Yeah, especially related to Web3, are there some things that you discovered already yourself that's possibly a good approach to make wallet interactions easier to interact, or the whole NFT thing, right? Because you said don't throw the word NFT directly into the ring. How can you make it subtle, some kind of sense? Are there some strategies that you have in your mind?
Yeah, I think really just starting with what you want your users to end up with in the end. Um, Usually, it's if it's a solid project and a solid product, it's NFTs don't really come into play till maybe the end, um, because your strategy is about leaving your customers satisfied. Um, it's in terms of like the projects that I'm doing. Let's take for example the gaming products. I'm building an FPS. In the end, I want someone to come onto that game, have a good FPS experience, have all your regular progression and things like that, and um, they don't really have to think about NFTs at all throughout the start of their experience all the way to the end of their life cycle of that game. Um, NFTs then come into play if I want to maybe have unlockables, special unlockables maybe, or um, making it still feel like um, a play to earn experience as opposed to a pay to win, right? Because that's one thing that the gaming community really doesn't like, even if you don't have the word NFTs in there. If it's a pay to win model, there's no incentive for a gamer at heart to spend all these hours when somebody else can just pay and get all the same rewards. So even without thinking about NFTs, you already see the red flags there. Um, NFTs can be a complement because we have paid experiences today. If you think about Apex Legends, and Halo, or just a bunch of other games, you already have this concept of paying for cosmetics and such. So it easily translates into NFTs because it's just another payment avenue, or um, another pay to experience model. So that's kind of how I think of it, where when NFTs and blockchain is involved, and that way you get to keep your core audience, as opposed to only attracting people that might want to come acquire something and then try to flip it, because I think that's been one of the biggest criticisms of NFTs as of late, where people feel like it's a bubble where you're attracting these uh, specific audience that want to um, buy it and essentially sell it at a higher price, and then they're not really engaged with the project after that. So thinking about your core user base, what they want. We already know what people want from the traditional markets. All of those things still matter when it comes to Web3 projects. Web3 is just a nice addition, or in some ways to make your authentication better, your payments better globally. For example, if you have a global audience, not having to deal with all these different jurisdictions of like banks and so on when you're trying to enable services. So if you think of it like that, as like Web3 is a utility for a better experience, um, and not so much Web3 is a way to essentially flip the asset, I think you'll be fine.
Very interesting thing said. I would be curious now, not sure if you have an answer to this. What if a user can't actually, or let's put it that way, if a user has to earn it, the NFT, right, just like a skin, for example, and is able to sell it as an NFT to other players then, so that players can actually mint new NFTs, new skins, right? And people who want to buy actually buy from these hardworking players. Would that be something that could make sense from your perspective, or is that more like FAT, endangered?
Yeah, I mean, it happens today, even without NFTs too. So it's I don't know exactly how the gaming community feels about it as a whole. I don't have enough data to understand that part. But I do know, like you have people that um, I think like they'll just farm like their account, or um, when I think of these role-playing games where they'll spend hours and hours building it up, and then maybe sell the account, and it's less official, it's less supported officially in game, but it's something that people still do um, on the secondary market, if you will. Um, and I think I've heard a lot of it happening with things like World of Warcraft or Dota, um, where you work it
Mm.
up to a point and then you sell it. And even on the more uh, traditional console games like FPS shooters and such, people do sell their accounts when it gets to a certain point. Um, at that level, it's like the user that is buying the account, you can usually tell if they also earned it. So that's another thing to take into account. If they're buying the account for the accomplishments, you'll be able to tell very quickly if you are that level of player. I think we're seeing a lot with streamers these days where people are really starting to question the lobbies that they're being put into. I've been seeing a lot of criticism that they're being placed in um, uh, competition friendly lobbies because the owners of the game want to promote the game. So it's beneficial for the game to put the streamers in a lobby where it's more favorable for them and where they'll do better. And then when you see them in a competition setting, they don't do as well, right? And it's because
Mm.
of these types of lobbies. And it's starting to be called out more. I think the gaming community, they hold people pretty accountable. Um, I found more than some other communities where they're really passionate, and if they see these kind of things happening, they will call it out. And with social media now, you'll see a bunch of people like make YouTube videos about it, and it's as a creator or somebody who is maybe purchasing an account, then you might want to think about doing that. You'll second guess or give it a second thought because you're aware that you'll be held accountable. Um, as a creator of the game, now you want to maybe think about how you want to facilitate what the community wants. Maybe it's not like selling accomplishment, but more so just like you said, a skin. A skin is probably fine. Um, if it's a rare skin that you have to earn, um, that gets into a bit more of a gray area because it's almost like an accomplishment, right? Like a badge of honor.
Mm.
But I think there's a balance that we're still learning. I think because things are still early. Um, you've seen a lot of criticism with some of these service games where that are that you do have to spend quite a bit to um, to get like different types of skin or combinations, and it's another area that gamers hold developers accountable in terms of like prices. And I don't want to say names of games at the moment, but they're very critical of prices of things in the market, and it'll be on you as a developer to figure out where is the most frictionless way to provide a service, but not in a way that takes away from um, a gamer at heart who wants to progress and earn their things, and share that with the community and have it remain meaningful over time.
Well said. Well said. We now went deep into the gaming rabbit hole. I would be curious, and I think one or other guest maybe as well, if someone is now interested in UX design, product design, whatever, motion graphics, is there something that you would recommend them doing, or what would you have liked if someone told you that years ago, for example?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting question. It's a bit loaded depending on what you want to do. If I start from a blanket, if I was to give blanket advice, the biggest thing is community. No matter what you do, you'll need to build your community, and that will weather you through the Web3 cycles. Like right now, it's a little bit of a bear market, but if you have a strong community, that's what's going to keep you going. The second thing is learning the traditional methods that are working today from the space you've chosen. So if it's a marketplace, learn all about traditional marketplaces. Learn about Amazon, learn about Shopify, Etsy, all these different platforms where creators provide a physical, or if it's a digital product that might be slightly different, but they're providing a product for a fee. And then you get into digital products as well. Like look at the like I think there's a lot of like tutorial websites where you can pay as well to experience something, and then there's also a lot of free ones as well if you're providing digital content. And then on the free ones, then you also have things like YouTube, and depending on whether it's paid, if it's more educational model, all the way up to your free digital content that you're providing. There are things in there that we know works, like for example YouTube, the way you go into a detail of a video, or if you're on Spotify, the way you might find a podcast, for example. If you're on Instagram, the way you might look at the detail of an image. If you're on Amazon, these types of things, and it might be different from like Coursera, maybe how you might find a product in Coursera, what is being promoted, what is being advertised, the different categories within that particular stream. And all of these things will still work in Web3. And then finally, I would ask them to then look at the chains that they want to build on. Ethereum has its benefits. It also has its drawbacks. Same thing if you're building it on Cardano, Solana. So learning about these layer 1 or layer 2 blockchains, and if it's something like a layer 3 blockchain, understanding the risks associated with it, especially with this whole Ethereum merge thing going on. There's a lot of questions now with maybe the layer 2s and 3s, like what would happen there. So being aware on a detailed level about these things will help you decide which blockchain you want to build on, especially also if you're environmentally conscious. There are better layer 1 blockchains that are more eco-friendly than others. They're not as energy intensive because of their consensus mechanism. And by consensus mechanism, I just mean how many machines verify a transaction on a blockchain. So if you perform something, if I send something to you, if I send you a shirt, for example, Kevin, on a platform,
Mhm.
how much energy has gone into, me writing that information on the blockchain and then transferring it to you. It's not the same across all layer one blockchains. And down the line, if you're building a business, these are things that your partners might be interested in, especially as we're seeing a lot of legislation now that are favoring the more eco-friendly, um, you know, companies, and when it's not even to do with blockchain. But if you're thinking way ahead here, um, you will be in a much better position as we start to see laws that favor, eco-friendly blockchain projects and such. It will matter for you to invest in. It will matter for um, if you want to, just promote yourself as a regulated company. These things will matter on that level. So yeah, those are the three things. Um, I hope that helps to give some perspective.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, mate. Yeah, I learned a lot. Thanks for that. Is there anything else, James, that you want to let the world know? Any cool project you want to talk about, or are you?
Yeah, I mean, um, I I'm happy to always chat with people in the space. I find it's still a very early space. We're so early in the space, if you will, and um, continue these conversations. Supporting the right projects, and even just if it's idea sharing. I think it will eventually lead to a better space and better sentiment with NFTs in general. Um, I'm on LinkedIn. I post every once in a while on LinkedIn about NFTs and such. Um, and yeah, it'd be great to come back and talk more about some of my personal projects, especially in the game aspect. I'm working on this FPS, like I mentioned, and I will have a demo not too long from now in a few months. So yeah, it'd be great to come back, maybe even share some visuals from the game, and continue chatting. It's been so great coming on, and thank you for your thoughtful questions.
Hey, sure, would love to. Just you know my email or LinkedIn as well. Just write me. For the guests, for the listeners, I will drop James' LinkedIn link and other socials below. And yeah, thank you, James, for being here and taking the time. And thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Wavect, the Web3 software company that understands what you want.